In this video, I will talk about the evolution of Greek sculptures from the Archaic, Early Classical, and Hellenistic period. I will be doing an analysis between the three sculptures, each made from a distinct period. One of them was made from an Archaic period, the other was made during an Early Classical period, and finally the third one was made from the Hellenistic period. I will mention similarities and differences between these sculptures and then finally give you my overall opinion of which time period did the best sculptures. For this first sculpture, the body proportions are essentially identical to those of a human, and the statue is comparable to that of a very tall adult man. The muscles of the body are represented simply and the arms are quite lengthy. The legs have a walking shape, the eyes are closed, and the hair looks to be braided. His face is rounded, leg muscles, abs, and hips are present, and they seem to be more naturalistic. But this sculpture is depicted being stiff in front and in a frontal position. Archaic Koros, who is so stiff and so stylized, they have that archaic smile. Men were always naked, they were always shown naked, and whenever there was a woman sculpture present, they were always shown fully clothed, never semi-naked or completely naked. Men were always shown strong in perfect shape, but with minimal representation of their muscles. So during the Archaic period, they've always depicted men and women to be beautiful, strong and healthy, but always showed minimal muscle description in the sculptures due to the artist not being fully developed of the human anatomy. According to Smart History in the website, they wrote, they are made of marble and stand in stiff, upright postures. They have archaic smiles that imbue them with a sense of vitality. Koroi are nude, displaying their slim, athletic bodies, but Koroi always appear clothed in luxurious dresses and cloaks. Whereas male nudity was embraced in archaic sculpture because men's bodies were celebrated as objects of beauty and strength. Female nudity was still considered inappropriate and immodest. Thanks to this quote from Smart History, we are learning that during the Archaic period, archaic sculptures always had a certain standard they had to live up to. If it was a guy statue, they were named Koroi, and they were always shown nude, slim, with athletic bodies, since Greeks at this time viewed men's body as objects of beauty and strength, a representation of them being beautiful and strong. While compared to a Korai, which is the female version of a female sculpture, they've always been shown clothed but wearing luxurious clothing, again to represent themselves being beautiful, but Korai being nude was considered inappropriate and modest to the Greeks at this time. According to Murray in her book A History of Greek Sculpture, she wrote, the eyebrows have the delicate conventional arch. The eyelids are in archaic manner, though more graceful in their lines, as are also the full lips with strongly marked contours. The ears set far back, but the lines of it exhibit the same level of graceful curves and forms which characterizes the archaic period of all art. Thanks to this quote, Murray was doing a visual analysis of an archaic sculpture. It's the sculpture of a Koroi, but in the earlier times of the archaic period. But with the same standards that she said of the eyelids are in archaic manner, the lines present seem more graceful, the lips are marked with contours, the ears set far back, but the lines of it exhibit the same level of the graceful curves being present, and the eyebrows being in a conventional arch. There's just many of standards that archaic sculptures had to have due to it being made in the archaic period. According to Rigaway, in their journal article, The Setting of Greek Sculpture, they wrote, it is generally assumed that the archaic period was incapable of producing complex arrangements of figures in interaction, and indeed 6th century groups appear most as single statues juxtaposed. This quote is saying that during the archaic period, all the sculptures, due to having meet a certain standard, they had no life. They always seemed to be frozen in time, stuck in that one pose that they are in. The statues just seemed to have no life, due to the Greeks of that time not being capable of producing high elite sculptures, due to them not having the significant knowledge of the human anatomy. This sculpture depicts a guy at the point in his life when his body is completely wrapped. His left leg and toes are bent under, dragging slightly, and he's preparing to toss that disc. This is a time of immense tension, but it's also a period of complete silence right before the action occurs. So in this sculpture, we could see some similarities and some differences between sculptures from the archaic period and classical period, the early classical period. Some similarities are still present is that not just in this sculpture, but for the early classical period sculptures, men were always depicted naked, beautiful, and muscular. Sometimes these sculptures always had an acrylic smile, but it was very minimal now compared to how it was in the acrylic period. But now the differences between period sculptures and early classical period sculptures is that now women's sculptures are rarely present, but they are always shown fully clothed. So in other words, women's sculptures are a rare thing to find during this time period, but whenever they were made, they were always shown fully clothed. And the same thing happens to them. They have that acrylic smile, but is very minimal compared to how it was in the past, in the acrylic period, archaic period. Now for both men and women, their body are more defined in their bodies by adding depth of muscles and body portions during the early classical period. They are no longer shown as stiff and still as possible. By now, classical sculptures are shown to be moving in action or in poses that don't make them look tense. Very few sculptures also showed women semi-nude. This was the very first period and the very first time period that Greek artists were starting to slowly show women sculptures semi-nude. But not a lot was made due to artists getting harsh criticism from people at that time, showing people to be perfect, but one thing still stays the same. During the archaic period and during now this early classical period, one thing still hasn't changed. They are still showing people to be perfect and healthy 24/7, even if it wasn't true. For example, if a ruler decided to make a sculpture of themselves during the early classical period, and if they were in their late 50s, they will ask the Greek artists to make a sculpture representing themselves, the ruler, in their early 20s, which in reality, that's not true, for during the time the ruler asked for a sculpture to be made, he is in his late 50s. But due to this being in the early classical period, Greek artists always made sculptures depicting people to be young, strong, and healthy, even if that wasn't the case. According to Smart History, in a website article they wrote, the sense of balance and harmony and the beauty in the proportions of the body. There is a kind of anti-realism here. For all of its careful naturalism, there is no real strain within the body. It is absolutely in rest and ideal even in this extreme pose. What this quote from Smart History is saying, that this sculpture that was made from the classical period has life into it compared to an archaic sculpture. Since the way its body proportion is, and then the pose it is, and by the muscle definition it has a sort of emotion in it, no longer having that archaic sculpture of being frozen in time. This sculpture looks like it's moving in time with feelings being present. According to John in his book Greek Sculpture, the Archaic Period, he wrote, "By the end of the century, the features in detail and expression have become far more natural, and the decline of the archaic smile can give place in the 5th century to an expression which can appear calm, dual, or even sulky. Thanks to this quote, we're learning that the Greeks transitioning from archaic art sculptures to classical sculptures, they slowly stopped using the archaic smile and instead just plastered a calm, dual, boring, or even sulky expression being present in their sculptures throughout the classical periods, throughout the early and late classical periods, which in some sculptures look good, but in most sculptures it didn't look good because it was missing that emotion, to draw in the viewers to feel what that sculpture was feeling, to know what's the sculpture's hidden meaning, what's its purpose, what does it exhibit. Thanks to the Greeks not using archaic smiles, they had a huge boost in viewers. But at the same time, them not expressing emotions in their sculptures, that huge boost just quickly demolished due to the viewers not having a connection with the sculptures. Laocoon and his son's sculpture is a freestanding sculpture in open form made from 6 blocks of white marble. So the 6 blocks of white Greek Parian marble were exquisitely carved to make this incredible, informative, and unique sculpture. This very detailed, asymmetrical, balanced sculpture is approximately 6 feet and 8 inches tall, and the composition of this sculpture is unique and very creative. We have 2 younger figures on each side of the sculpture, and in the middle of the sculpture we have a bigger, muscular figure with snakes being wrapped around all 3 figures. Some forms overlap with other elements of the sculpture since the figures exhibit twist in space, but still there is enough space in the sculpture that makes it look like the sculpture is moving in panic, pain, desperation, afraidness, and shock, since the artist used real space and diagonal lines to do this method. The open form of this sculpture allows the viewer to look around the sculpture and see between the body, which gives it a sense of liveness. The color of this sculpture is numerous shades of white, like white, ivory, beige, cream, eggshell, vanilla, pearl white, warm white, and white dove, just to name a few. And due to the color being white, it creates a sensation of being pure, the beginning of Western culture, the source from which the canyon of a whole civilization has sprung. Now, for this sculpture, it was made in the Hellenistic period. Comparing this sculpture to the acrylic period, we see a major difference. The difference between this Hellenistic sculpture from early classical period and acrylic period is that the acrylic smile is no longer present. Sure, in the early classical period, some sculptures stopped using the acrylic smile and just had a blank emotionless expression. But now, in the Hellenistic period, Greek artists completely stopped using the archaic smile and instead chose to show now real emotion present in Hellenistic sculptures. So however the Hellenistic sculptures were depicted, they are shown being happy, in pain, sadness, tired, whatever form they were depicted, they had an expression that matched their body appearance and what kind of energy they were releasing. Another difference, a huge difference now in Hellenistic sculptures is that people were no longer depicted being perfect. Now they're showing people's true ages, so sculptures that showed old people were made. It also depicted normal people of all social classes and didn't paint people as perfect, because since in the past, during the archaic period and early classical period, they've always depicted people being perfect, being young, healthy, strong, and they only ever depicted people of the higher class. They never depicted people of the poor class. Sometimes they did depict people in the middle class, but most of the time it was in the elite class. But now in the Hellenistic period, the Greeks are now depicting people of all social classes. If you're either poor class, low class, middle class, or elite class, or high class, they're depicting them no matter what social class they are in. The Hellenistic period broke classical traditions, so women and men were shown either fully naked or semi-naked. Compared to the acrylic period, they've only always showed men naked, women not naked. And compared to the early classical period, they've always shown men naked, women clothed, and very rare sculptures that existed that showed women semi-naked. But now in the Hellenistic period, they broke that tradition and both men and women are shown naked. Not only is emotion now present in the Hellenistic sculptures, what's also present is the huge development of Greek artists having on the human anatomy. Compared to the acrylic period, they didn't really have that much experience on the human anatomy. Then compared to the early classical, they had some knowledge of the human anatomy, but not that much compared to the Hellenistic period, that all Hellenistic sculptures show a huge advancement in human anatomy present in that sculpture. According to Smart History, in the website article they wrote, but one of the things that people have noticed about this sculpture is the terrible pain, agony expressed by the figures, but the simultaneous sense of beauty that we contemplate in the figure's body. The Laocoon statue has made an impact on its viewers. Its dramatic description of the agony of Laocoon and his sons forges an emotional connection with its audience. This quote is very important since it's saying the sculpture of Laocoon and his sons being made in the Hellenistic period, it has emotion present in it. We, the viewers, could sense pain it's feeling, the agony it's feeling, and other feelings like confusion, distress that they might be feeling. We viewers see it and also feel it as well, due to it being depicted the way it is, with incredible human anatomy being present and emotion being present, and in the form and pose it is in, due to it not being in the pose that an archaic sculpture would be in. This statue truly has an impact on its viewers since it has emotion present on it. This sculpture could have really had a great impact on the Greeks in the past during the Hellenistic period. Compared to this statue to an archaic sculpture, this Hellenistic sculpture is a huge advancement of Greek art in a matter of years. The Hellenistic era saw a flourishing of the arts as creators experimented with novel approaches to expressing personal experiences, emotional effects, and intricate details. Hellenistic sculpture showed a new sense of personality and introspection by displaying reality and human feeling. Sculptures at this time evolved during the Hellenistic period into something more dynamic, reaching out into the viewer's space and welcoming views from all angles rather than appearing as static forms intended to be seen exclusively from the front. Now that you know the differences and similarities between archaic sculptures, early classical sculptures, and Hellenistic sculptures, it has come to my personal opinion of which time period made the best sculptures. Well, in my opinion, and as my other fellow classmates also mentioned in the past, and as also scholars mentioned too, Hellenistic sculptures were the best sculptures from Greeks throughout time, comparing to archaic sculptures and early classical sculptures and even late classical sculptures. Hellenistic sculptures were way better since they broke so many barriers. They broke the barrier of having an archaic smile, always showing men and women being perfect, always being in a pose that either seemed frozen, stuck in time, or in a pose that showed movement, but not movement from a various numbers of angles. They were always showing men and women naked, no longer having clothes, and of course the development of the human anatomy being so significantly present in the sculptures. Hellenistic sculptures were just the best sculptures out of all the time periods of Greek, since viewers could connect with them due to them having emotion being present in their body movements, in their pose that they are in, even on their facial expressions. Comparing that to archaic sculptures and early classical sculptures, that was a hard thing to do in the early classical sculptures in the early classical period, and even an extremely harder thing to do in the archaic period. Since during the archaic period, if an archaic sculpture was shown in pain, they always had that archaic smile, which was weird and gave a creepy feeling to the viewers. Comparing that to early classical sculptures, if they were also in pain, they either showed that same archaic smile or just shown a clear dual expression, which didn't really connect to the viewer. Comparing that to Hellenistic sculptures, if they were shown in pain, sadness, happiness, they had a facial expression that met that standard, which connected the viewers to them. So in my opinion, and as many as my fellow peers and scholars also agree on, that the Hellenistic sculptures are the best sculptures the Greeks made. That was their best period of life of being a Greek and living in. Since, again, they always shown men and women how they are, not showing them being perfect, showing them either clothed, semi-nude, naked, show them in poses that viewers could view in a 360 angle no matter what angle you are in, and being depicted with a good amount of muscle and body development thanks to the Greek artists of that time being so experienced in human anatomy.